if you look at restoring the whole Andes, the entire Andean mountain range, you can't just go at it by planting trees. There's so many other things that you need to do to holistically permit nature to actually come back.
Welcome to another episode of Rewilding the World with me, Ben Goldsmith, and I'm sitting with Florent Kaiser, who is, I guess you could say, an eco-entrepreneur, an Earthshot Prize winner, someone who has shown enormous energy and ambition and courage and effectiveness in building environmental solutions. And particularly, I want to talk to Florent about Acción Andina, which is one of the world's most phenomenal, most ambitious rewilding projects anywhere, which seeks to revive the ancient Inca principle of Andean Minca, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, which loosely translates as commitment to working together for the common good in order to restore an enormous, or once enormous, ecosystem, which is the high altitude forests of the Andes in South America, of which only scraps remain. So I'm hoping that Florent will tell me that story and to talk of this project. Florent, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm very grateful to you.
No, likewise, thank you for allowing us to share our work and our story with the world. I believe we're in a time in the world where these stories of hope and impact need to be shared widely for us to collectively get this trajectory right. So I'm very thankful for being here today.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. There's more good news out there than people know about. And I think rewilding and restoration of ecosystems is kind of at the heart of the optimism that I personally feel around some of these things. And I set up the podcast to shine a light on these kind of projects. In fact, I was reading a magazine called Global Cement, as one does. And the reason was I had Googled bison reintroduction because I'm interested in some of the indigenous-led rewilding with bison that's taking place in North America, and there's some interesting bison restoration happening in Europe and the UK. And I came across a huge rewilding project in northern Mexico, which was funded entirely by Cemex, the cement company. And it just was, no one knew about this 160,000 hectare El Carmen rewilding project with bison. And I thought, well, if the only place I can read about this is Global Cement, a trade magazine for the cement industry, then there must be an opportunity to bring these stories to a wider audience with a podcast. And I first saw your name in connection with Acción Andina as the winner of the Earthshot Prize. Was that last year or the year before? How was that and when was that?
It's been this sort of life-transforming moment was November 2023, a date I will never forget in my life.
Florent, so it's been transformational for your project, Acción Andina, winning this Earthshot Prize, and presumably not just in terms of the cash that you've received, but in terms of profile and so on. I mean, have you been all over the newspapers locally in South America?
Yeah, well, definitely. It's been a transformative. Yeah, it's great to have £1 million, $1.3 million to continue doing and elevating the work that we've done. But frankly, all of the around has been much more significant than the prize money itself. I would say first and foremost, the most important change is that sense that I just alluded to, the sense of graduation, the sense that you have done something that is inherently right, that you have built a project, you have built a business, and it has been recognized. And that internal recognition for yourself saying, hey, we pulled something off collectively with all our partners in the communities in the Andes that has caught the world's attention. That has been giving us a sense of leadership, a sense of achievement, but also especially a sense of passion going forward. If we can do that, we can do much more. And that's, I would say, is the most significant outcome of the Earthshot Prize. The second, what the Prince and his team, including Hannah Jones and many others, have pulled off, I find quite marvelous. When we first met the Prince back in November in Singapore, when we were announced to be a winner shortly later, the level of knowledge which translate into real authentic interest that there was from his personal side was mind-blowing to us. It was definitely not a 10-second briefing with 3 bullet points on our project. No, he knew things in depth. And that translates into the entire set and production machine around the Earthshot Prize that Hannah Jones and her entire team have built. There is passion, there is collective sort of enthusiasm to really get us to the next level. There's a sense of urgent optimism and hope. And that is not only contagious, that energy, that is really elevating both, I would say, for us, as well as for the world that is kind of captivated with the prize itself, right? So that's been a really, really nice touch to it.
Yeah, the British royal family have been pretty good on the environment for a long time. I mean, the Duke of Edinburgh, the father of the present king, was involved in the founding of the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, the WWF, and was a champion of wildlife in a number of different ways. And the king has been an extraordinary voice for the environment. His book Harmony was a big influence on me, which really describes the kind of post-Enlightenment disconnect of humans from nature and how we need to reinsert ourselves back into the miracle of nature if our civilization is going to have a long-term future. And the Prince of Wales, Prince William, has done this amazing thing with the Earthshot Prize. Their love of nature is genuine, and their care for these things is translating into real impact. There's no doubt. They have incredible convening power.
And that shines through. You just touched on something, that genuineness. And I think for me that is so super important. I feel personally, my generation, I'm now 38, was born 87. My generation kind of was born and grew the entire youth through this sort of moment of really putting clarity to climate change, but there was a big accompanying sort of sense of doom and gloom, right? We are at the edge of the planet. We know we're doing something super wrong. We know the impact and so on. And there's two choices there. Either you fall into that doom and gloom, which comes with a lot of anxiety, with a lot of crisis, with a lot of fear, or there's the alternative path. And I think that's the one we have chosen. The alternative path is to come together and start a new age here and start with a full, when we are on the edge of collapse as humans, we need to reinvent ourselves. And I think the age of sort of planetary collective role of stewardship of the planet, healing the planet. And I think being alive in that time where we have the opportunity to make that shift, where we have the opportunity to bring the current system to a new system, where we have the opportunity with a lot of hope and enthusiasm to lead the ways toward absolutely new models, I think that's an amazing time to be alive. I mean, there's a lot of actual real despair, and there's lives at the moment that are suffering from so many dire consequences, whether it's wars and conflict, or here, we have had the greatest fires on records across the Amazon and the Andes this year, and probably next year it's going to be worst. And so there's real life challenges that people have. But in the big picture, if we can adopt a stance collectively as humanity, where we accept we have brought the planet to this state, but now we actually have the tools, the leadership, the clarity, the vision to shift that around and really engage in an age of planetary healing and stewardship, then I think we have a great shot at getting the future right. So I'm very, very passionate about that. And I see all the work that we're doing at Global Forest Generation and Acción Andina pointing directly towards that. I'll say one more element. A lot of people ask me that quite a bit. You've planted trees and you've succeeded in planting 10 million trees so far, and it's all great. But what is it truly? And I think, yes, each and every tree is important on Earth and in the Andes. And the 10 million trees we're very proud of. It took a lot of resources, a lot of leadership, a lot of convening to get those 10 million trees planted. But to me, it was never really about the single tree. It was never really about the trees that we're planting. It's the message beyond. It's that message of hope. It's the light that comes with the collective action to do something for the planet on an unprecedented scale. That is what really shines through Acción Andina. And if we do that right with local communities, instead of coming in with new technology, which is going to all achieve that with AI and drones and blockchain, but actually reviving deep ancestral principles that people are familiar with, that people live by, that defines their culture, and be able to achieve both, that is a most beautiful outcome that continues to inspire me, even after 6 years now in that, on a day-to-day basis, to go much further than that.
Florent, so you're working in the Andes. Tell me about the ecosystem, the high altitude forests that have captivated you and that you're working on with Acción Andina.
Absolutely. Well, I'm not from the Andes, right? I happened to move to South America myself roughly 10 years ago, a little bit more now. My wife is from Peru, and I've met our co-founder and partner, an extraordinary indigenous leaders from the high Andes, Constantino Auca, who sort of opened the world of the Andes to me. And what I discovered was such a fascinating world. So what's happening in the Andes? The Andes is one of the highest and one of the longest mountain ranges in the world. We go up to altitudes, we count in meters, up to almost 7,000 meters in height. The Andes stretch from Venezuela down to Patagonia over a 7,000 to 9,000 kilometer stretch. That's a very, very long stretch of land crossing 7 countries. What is happening in the Andes? I mean, the Andes holds 70% of the world's last tropical glaciers, which means a lot for water security. But water security is becoming a huge issue. So we have the glaciers. Now, unfortunately, the glaciers are melting away very rapidly, and we've just said goodbye to the last glacier in Venezuela. And so the water impact of that is severe. And the only natural substitute of the water holding capacities of those glaciers happen to be high altitude forests and ecosystem in the high Andes. So the forests and ecosystems we work with, mainly polylepis forests, have an amazing capacity to hold water high up in the Andes and disperse that into watersheds, into communities, into major cities. And that's on both sides of the Andean mountain range. So on one end, these are the watersheds of the great Amazon basin ecosystem, the great Amazon biome. And so it's, the water flows all the way into the rivers and make this amazing ecosystem, and the lungs of the earth actually work. And on the other hand, this water flows into each and every major multi-million people city across the South American western part of the continent. So from Lima to Santiago, to Chile, to Bogota in Colombia, and Quito in Ecuador. And so that is a very, very important part of it.
So what are these forests like? For me, I understand English and European forests of mostly broadleaf trees. What is a high altitude Andean forest actually like? What kind of trees? What kind of animals?
So if you go up in Wales, I'm sure you've been there, in Snowdonia, that is a very similar ecosystem, to be honest, though much lower in altitude, that you have in the high Andes. So you have all these big mountain stretches, and you have the vegetation actually quite sparse. The high Andean vegetation, especially the polylepis ecosystem, which is sort of the last piece before the vegetation limit is reached, is a very interesting forest. The polylepis trees are sort of this crooked, mystical sort of forest they're quite low in altitudes. I mean, the further you go down, the higher they grow. The further you go up, the more bush-like they get. But they're, if you remember the Lord of the Rings, when they're stepping through these almost impenetrable forests with a lot of moss and crooked trees and branches, that's how it looks like with a healthy forest in the high Andes. And there is a very important function to that. As they're so dense, and this particular function of the trees, they have the capacity to capture water. So what happens there is moss accumulates on those branches of these polylepis trees. That's their superpower. Moss accumulates on their branches, and that moss filters out humidity from the air. And once the moss is really soaked with water, it actually drops down on the ground. And over time, these trees and these ecosystems build huge sponge-like layers on the ground that capture both water and an incredible amount of carbon. So that's their real function for the continent.
It's interesting that you use the Snowdonia analogy, because the western fringes of Britain and also the northwest of France and Spain were, of course, the place where you found Celtic or Atlantic temperate rainforests with plants growing on plants and very spongy, mossy, wet floor to the forest. And of course, we lost most of that habitat. More than 95% of the Celtic Atlantic rainforest has been destroyed. And places like Snowdonia have tiny patches of it remaining. And I wonder why in the high Andes has that habitat also been under attack? Where have the trees gone? Who's deforested so high up the mountains?
Great analogy. I mean, it's the same. We have roughly between 2 and 10%, depending on the area, 2 and 10% left of these forests across the Andes. So very similar issue in terms of impact. So scientists that we talked to agree that the greatest part of the deforestation was caused by two interlinked events. One, that is the impact that the colonization had on the Incan Empire. So the Incas were masters in managing natural resources. They really understood glacier, forest below it to capture the water, natural channels, and then actual aqueducts and other infrastructure to bring the water to their cities and the agriculture. Once the colonization hit, a lot of this governance system that included natural resources were actually quite degraded, and the communities went back to having a very unstructured existence and took natural resources from anywhere they could, from the nearby forest and so on. So that has led to a lot of unplanned degradation of these ecosystems over the last 500 years. That's a long period of time. And at the same time, the introduction of European sheep and cattle, which had a devastating impact on the rest of those forests. So llamas and alpacas here in the altitude have a very selective feeding pattern, right? But the European cows and cattle and sheep, don't really select that well. So they were grazing away, and that's still going on, to be honest. There's a lot of grazing happening in the high altitudes. So that's mostly how you lost all the forest. Now, more recently, fires, with including climate change and raising temperatures, fires, as we've just seen this year, are even more, getting rid of the last stretches and little flecks of forest that are remaining. So we're in a stage where this is actually really important to protect them and restore those forests.
What are the forests like as you get to the lower altitudes? The trees get presumably bigger. Do you get a different mix of species? And is there more forest remaining in the lower reaches of the Andes?
Yeah, so at the very top, it's bush-like. And there's very few species. Only the species that have had this amazing capacity to adapt to those harsh environments and high altitudes and high insolation rate. As you move further down with a bit warmer climate and more water availability, the trees definitely get bigger. So the trees at the very top can be 500 years old and only reach 1 or 1.5 meters. When you reach 3,500, which is still in European terms very high, but here in the Andes, it's halfway through, they can become 15 to 20 meters big and really big, ancient 500-year-old trees that have a massive trunk. And the forests get bigger. It still sort of maintain the same mystical vibe with a lot of moss and a lot of intertwined sort of branches and little streams in between, but there is also more vegetation in that. So it feels almost, how would I describe it? It feels almost like a sort of the most ancient forest you would see, and somewhere deep in the woods, and you would see Robin Hood going through them and like that. That's a little bit the feel that you get walking through them.
So is Acción Andina, which of course is the initiative which won the Earthshot Prize and that you have created, is that working all the way from Venezuela all the way down to the southern part of Chile and Argentina? Or are you working in all 7 of those countries? Or are you emphasizing one or other?
We started in 2018. So basically how that went is our co-founder, Constantino Auca, who is, again, this indigenous leader from Peru, he had understood how to revive these ancestral principles to unite the people, to actually get reforestation and forest protection done. And when I visited him, he had invited me to come, and we asked him, you've done this amazing work over the last 30 years in this area, in Peru, in Cusco. What's next for you? And Tino was like, I believe we can take this model all across Peru and potentially all across the Andes. Right. So we started in one country. We started in Peru in 2018. I think there was another project in Argentina that was immediately on board. So we started with 2 countries. We are now in 2024 stepping into the 6th country, which is Colombia. So we have Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Chile, Argentina. So it has grown into an initiative that is now spreading 6 out of the 7 countries. A bit unfortunately, as we all know, Venezuela has gone through crises over the last decade or so. There will be a time where we will work with the brothers and sisters in Venezuela, and we can't wait for it, but we're not there yet.
And the culture of the people who live in the high Andes it's similar all the way down the spine of South America. They have a lot in common. The people you're dealing with in each of the countries you mentioned, they understand each other. They speak a common cultural and spiritual language. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And with slight differences, important differences. So in general, let's say the pre-Incan culture and the Incan culture is really still present in especially Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, that were closer, let's say, to the center of the Incan Empire, which happened to be located in Cusco in Peru. However, the Incan Empire reached as far as down to Patagonia and as far up as Venezuela. So there is remains of that. And you find those practices still alive in the communities that have largely remained in the high Andes. Not so much when you go further down towards big cities, but where you had communities still living in a fairly remote and isolated way. Not 100% isolated. The Inca were never an isolated culture. They were traders and colonizers in their own way. But you do find those remains of the culture all the way up to Venezuela down to Patagonia. The difference is actually quite a sad story. Chile and Argentina over the last century have had a very bizarre relationship with the communities, and there's been a lot of killing and community and cultural cleansing going up almost in those areas. And so today, while most of the communities we work with are on community land and still practice their ancient presence, in Chile, Argentina, it's quite often on private land. It's private landowners that have a different way of looking at land. And there's the communities as such are not as organized as the ones that you have in Peru, for example.
This episode of Rewilding the World is very kindly brought to you by Uni, that's UNI, the world's first nature-friendly line of luxury body care. We've all heard about the harm that sun cream does to coral reefs, but it's not just sun cream and it's not just coral reefs. Well, Uni makes plastic-free, nature-friendly essentials like shampoo, conditioner, hand wash, and even natural deodorant, all full of nourishing ingredients such as seaweed kelp, aloe vera, and olive oil. We've been loving our Uni products, but don't take it from me. Here's my wife, Jemima.
Yes, I really love them. They're such clean and nourishing products. The microalgae body oil is so good and really smells amazing.
You can find Uni products at Space NK or at weareuni.com. So what Florent, is the methodology that you have adopted for the large-scale restoration of these ancient forests? How are you working with indigenous communities in order to do that? Because the undertaking seems so huge. I mean, we're talking millions and millions of hectares of degraded or completely lost forests, which are at an extremely high altitude. My mind boggles at your ambition, and I'd just like to know how do you plan on doing it, and how does the local culture help you to do that?
All right, so there's several answers to that, but I will re-highlight the starting point of it. And the starting point was our co-founder, Constantino Auca, who recognized two things very importantly. He recognized, one, forests can be brought back to reforestation, restoration, conservation, technical activities that you can actually real life do. And second, and much more importantly, he recognized that he could work with his own culture. He could revive ancestral principles of Aini and Minca, which stand for reciprocity and communal service. And that's how the Inca pulled the people together to build their empire, fortresses and Inca trades and so on. So Tino recognized he could revive those ancestral principles to actually unite hundreds and then thousands and now tens of thousands of people across the Acción Andina to protect and revive those forests. And there is a key in there. Now you have a model that is profoundly culturally respectful and understood by all the communities. And the communities, because it's from their own culture, are motivated. There's a crisis happening. People are seeing less and less water available. We can do something about it. So we are actually not going and convincing communities to do something. The communities come to us and say, we need to restore our forests. We need to reforest our land and protect the forests that are left. Otherwise, we won't have any water. And the tool of Andean Minca is what we use to basically unite the people, structure the projects, and then create from a dream to a project to a program, and now more and more to a movement across the Andes with tens of thousands of people coming together without being paid for it necessarily. That's Andean Minca. That's the reciprocal service to the greater good, to the community. And that allows us to have a huge workforce that actually plant trees and conserves forests across an entire, project that is now across 6 countries. But let me say that we're just at the beginning. There couldn't be something more inspiring for me to know we've started with a few hundred people and have now over 40,000 people actively participate in activities 6 years on. But it's just the beginning. In order to really restore the Andean forests, it will take 100 years or more. And it will take hundreds of thousands of people, probably millions of people, pulling in the same direction. Andean Minca has the power to do that, right? Paired with resources and management and all of the other things that we know how to do, right? But that central piece is the Andean Minca that has the inherent culturally driven power to unite those people for collective action.
How much of the practical work revolves around physically planting trees? And how much of it is just about removing the grazing pressure from domestic livestock, which obviously carries its own difficulties with the community?
Be very frank with you. People look quite often for simple solution, and they absolutely have a place. So the reforestation is a straightforward activities, and the community get this. It's producing trees, it's in the nursery, it's building nurseries, producing native trees. It's then going out and collectively planting them, and that's straightforward, and then caring for them, right? But there's all sorts of other activities. If you look at restoring the whole Andes, the entire Andean mountain range, you can't just go at it by planting trees. There's so many other things that you need to do to holistically permit nature to actually come back. So it's a mix. It's a mix of restoration through reforestation. It's a mix of protecting forest, including creating protected area, helping title lands of the communities. It's a mix of helping local businesses that actually protect forests rather than destroy them come to light, and so many more activities. Ultimately, there is through Andean Minca in the reforestation activities something quite magic. Reforestation through Andean Minca engages the entire community. So you have on a reforestation day, everybody from the youngest age to the oldest age participating. That's how you get 1,000 people showing up for reforestation day and planting 100 to 200,000 trees in a single day. But the key here is that it engages everybody in the community. And that's sort of gives the entire community sort of a guiding factor. We are taking care of our lands. We are collectively stewarding where we live. And that spirit transcends into everything that the community is doing in general. So all of a sudden, the grazing patterns can be addressed. The fuel wood collection, which could be detrimental to those native forests, can be outsourced somewhere else. And so on and so on. So it really helps you creating change and in the narrative with the community.
It's an unbelievable story. How did you come to be in the Andes? I mean, where did you grow up, and where did you get your love of nature, and how did you end up here?
I was born in France, so mother French, father German, which is sometimes a contradiction in terms of culture in itself. But for some reason, I grew up quite close to nature. We had a countryside house. And I was all the time, even as a young kid, in the forest. And that's really through my mother, who has accompanied me quite a bit into that. There was a very strong connection. I went to study forest engineering, not because I was really interested in an engineering part, but it was what I chose, the forest, sort of to dedicate my life to. And then the next 20 years almost has been around evolving, okay, what can be my greatest contribution to protecting this marvelous ecosystem, the forest around the world. And I've been for the first 10 years, I would say, of my professional career, going in every continent literally and being engaged in a lot of different projects that were working at all levels, private sector, local communities, with government agency, and learning mostly how to protect the forest. Something was very different in the Andes. So I arrived in South America, invited by my wife today, who's said, I live in Peru, I work in the Amazon, come over. And that's what I did. And as I alluded to before, at some point, Tino, our co-founder, has invited me to come to the Andes. And that's where this big new mission started. And the thing that was different when I met Tino is you had someone that was not only providing a clear model that works ambitiously with communities on the ground according to the local culture, but also a vision of an entire continental scale impact. And that was truly what was different for me. That was truly what I knew I want to bring my entire passion and skill set to be doing, the kind of planetary and continental scale impact I was always dreaming for. And that was the different thing with Acción Andina. And when we got going, and it still lasts today, that is really what drives me. Can we collectively on Earth come together across entire continents, across entire mega ecosystems, spanning several countries, come together and start healing the planet as ambitiously as we can? And that is a lot of what Acción Andina does. And Global Forest Generation, which goes beyond Acción Andina, will be starting to take this approach across the world in the next few years as well. So we're very, very excited and moving also beyond the Andes gradually.
What I think so brilliant about your work and about this initiative is that it harnesses the two most powerful forces that we have at our disposal to rebuild nature. The first is cultural. We need to reconnect ourselves individually and collectively with the natural world. We need to consider ourselves part of nature rather than outside of nature, raiding it for what we need. And you have a head start in the places where you're operating because they already have this culture, this spiritual connection. It's closer to the surface than it is, say, in Western Europe. That's the first. The second is economic. Is if you can make the restoration of nature economically viable for local communities, if you can demonstrate the clear economic value to local society of having nature, then you're onto a winner. And we see this in the UK now. You see now a growing understanding that if we reforest the national parks, we'll have reduced flash flooding in the winter, we'll have reduced drought in the summer, and we'll also have magical, beautiful places in which to spend time and so on. And I think that is really the answer for the world. It's both cultural and economic. We have to do both. And it seems like Acción Andina has its early days, but it seems like you found this formula. But I said it at the start of our conversation, I'm just blown away by the scale of what you're aiming to achieve. And the fact that the Earthshot Prize have recognized this and have given you this award is unbelievable validation. And so I'm going to be watching with huge interest and huge love for what you're doing. And I hope I'll have the opportunity one day, Florent, to come to the high Andes and to see what's happening there and maybe to plant a tree myself. But thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me today, and I'm filled with admiration for you. I so enjoyed catching up with Florent Kaiser of Acción Andina. This is such a fitting winner of the amazing Earthshot Prize. Exactly the kind of project that we like to talk about on the Rewilding the World podcast series. If you enjoyed that episode as much as I enjoyed making it, I'd be really grateful if you'd spread the word among your friends, give us a like, maybe a review on whatever platform you use to get your podcasts. It all makes such a difference. Thank you. Next time I'm going to be talking to Gerhard Schwab in Bavaria. Gerhard has been described as the Pablo Escobar of beavers. There's really few heroes of the rewilding movement that have achieved as much as Gerhard has during the last 40 or so years. Gerhard realized the importance of beavers in rebuilding shattered ecosystems in Europe and managed to persuade legislators all over the continent to accept beavers back into their landscapes. And Gerhard has pioneered the reintroduction of beavers in a long list of countries. There's really few people who know as much about this species as Gerhard.
You already know that this isn't about one species. It's about systems, interdependence, collapse. And yet, wild salmon, one of the clearest indicators we have, are vanishing fast. Their decline signals something deeper, something more dangerous. I'm Jim Murray. I host The Last Salmon. It's not a side story. It's the biodiversity story that everyone like you should be listening to. Season 2's out now.
One of the best ways to support rewilding is to go and visit rewilding projects on the ground. My friends at the European Nature Trust have asked me to tell you about a series of coexistence adventures that they've put together. They're designed to give you the best chance of seeing Europe's most iconic species: bears, wolves, lynx, and so on. All of these are on the rise in Europe because of rewilding projects. These trips are hosted by expert guides and conservationists, and most importantly, the European Nature Trust is giving half of the revenues directly to the foundations working on the ground to restore wildlife. I'd love you to check out these coexistence adventures at the European Nature Trust website.